The flight attendant moved through the cabin with a sharp, deliberate urgency, cutting through the air like a blade. "Ma'am," she said, her voice clipped and firm, "I've already informed you. You need to move to economy class now, or I'll have to call security." The atmosphere inside the plane had thickened, heavy with unspoken tension. Passengers exchanged furtive glances. Some in first class pretended to be engrossed in their books or phones, fingers fidgeting with feigned indifference. Others, however, had already pulled out their cell phones, sensing the makings of a scene worth capturing. The air crackled with anticipation. In seat 2A, a woman sat, poised and composed. She didn't react, didn't flinch. She simply existed with an air of quiet authority that made people straighten their backs without realizing why. Her suit was impeccably tailored, sleek black fabric hugging her frame like it had been custom-stitched for no one but her. No flashy jewelry, no designer labels screaming for attention. Yet somehow, she was the most noticeable person in the room. Commanding, unshaken. Her name was Eleanor Graves. But at that moment, no one on this plane knew it. Across from her, the flight attendant, Elise Brooks, folded her arms, a small smirk of certainty curling at the edges of her lips. She had handled disputes before. She knew exactly how this was supposed to go. Her uniform was pressed to perfection, her blonde hair sculpted into a tight, unyielding bun. Her nails painted a neutral, polished shade, something with a name like Whispering Taupe or Classic Sandstone. Elise took pride in professionalism, and yet there was something in her tone now. Something clipped, something sharper than necessary. A subtle edge that those seated nearby picked up on, shifting slightly in their seats. This was no ordinary seat dispute. First class is for, Elise hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. But that hesitation made the words she left unsaid ring louder than the ones she spoke. Our priority passengers. The pause was a calculated insult, wrapped in formality. "I don't want to embarrass you, ma'am," she continued, her voice light, but laced with something heavier, something less civil, "but I need you to move." Eleanor didn't blink. She moved slowly, deliberately, reaching into the smooth leather of her bag. When she pulled out her boarding pass, she didn't thrust it at Elise. She simply held it up as if offering a moment of grace, a chance to reconsider, to correct course. Elise barely spared it a glance. "Ma'am, I don't know how you ended up here, but this section is—" Another pause, another unspoken boundary drawn. Eleanor let out a slow, measured breath. She had seen this before. Different places, different faces, but the same story. People who assumed, people who believed they held the reins on who belonged where. A man in seat 3C, an older gentleman with salt and pepper hair and a crisp navy blazer, leaned forward, watching the exchange unfold with furrowed brows. He wasn't the only one. The energy in the cabin shifted as more passengers turned their attention toward them. "I need you to move now." Elise's voice cut through the air again, louder, firmer, meant for the entire cabin to hear. "Or I will have security waiting for you the moment we land." Eleanor didn't stiffen, didn't react. She simply placed the boarding pass down on the tray table in front of her, folded her hands in her lap, and said, "No." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with something thick, something alive. A ripple of discomfort passed through the rows. People looked away, suddenly fascinated by the patterns in the fabric of their seats. They had all seen something like this before. Maybe not on a plane, but in grocery stores, in lobbies, in meetings where the rules had seemed to bend for some but not for others. Another flight attendant, Jessica, hovered nearby, her posture uncertain. She bit her lip before hesitantly murmuring, "Elise, maybe we should just—" "No!" Elise cut her off sharply, her voice tight. "This isn't about the ticket." And there it was. Jessica took an instinctive step back, like she had just walked too close to the edge of something dangerous. The realization flickered across her face. Elise had just spoken words she couldn't take back. Eleanor tilted her head, considering her opponent now. "Then what's it about?" Elise opened her mouth, then shut it, jaw tightening. No one moved. Then, with a slow, quiet motion, Eleanor reached into her bag again. Not for her phone, not for anything dramatic, just a simple black notebook. She flipped it open, clicked her pen, and began to write. Elise blinked, momentarily thrown. What are you doing?" Eleanor didn't look up. "Taking notes." The color rose high in Elise's cheeks. "Ma'am, I will have you removed from this seat." Preposterous. The word came from behind Elise, cool and unimpressed. The man in the navy blazer had spoken. He leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "She's sitting in her assigned seat. We've all seen her ticket. Why is this even a conversation?" Elise turned toward him, frustration flickering in her eyes. "Sir, this is an internal matter." "Not anymore," he said smoothly. "You've made it a public one." Low murmurs spread through the cabin. Eleanor didn't say a word. She didn't need to. She simply clicked her pen once. Elise's fingers curled into fists, knuckles going white. Then, as if suddenly deciding this fight wasn't worth it, at least not now, she spun on her heel and strode toward the front of the cabin. But the tension didn't leave with her. It clung to the air, thick and unmoving, stretching across the rows like a shadow. Eleanor turned to Jessica. The second flight attendant looked apologetic, like she knew this wasn't right, but didn't have the authority to do anything about it. Eleanor gave her a single, knowing nod before picking up her boarding pass, tucking it back into her bag, and settling into her seat. Eyes were still on her, the weight of the moment still pressing. And she knew, without a shadow of a doubt, this wasn't over. At the front of the cabin, Elise spoke into the intercom, her voice overly bright, artificially cheerful. "Ladies and gentlemen, beverage service will begin shortly. Please remain seated and enjoy your flight." But no one was fooled. Not Eleanor. Not the passengers. Elise wasn't done, and neither was she.